Niloticus is often regarded as one of the stronger monsters in this game currently, and I've always found this notion a little silly. I've never really played him that much, and the times I did, I struggled quite a bit. You also very rarely ever see Nilos in the wild, and when you do, they tend to also not get very good results. Why is that? You'd think if this monster was as good as everyone says he is, he'd be having a lot more people play him, and the ones that do would be doing a lot better. Well, that's the main mystery that motivated me to make this video. Is this guy really all he's hyped up to be, or do people just have no idea what they're talking about? Niloticus is a speed over stamina archetype monster. He has 28 sprint speed, 38 stamina, and deals 20 damage per hit. He attacks on a fairly short cooldown, and his hitbox extends from his head to his tail. For some weird reason, Niloticus also gains 2 stamina on a successful basic attack. It's whatever, I guess. 28 sprint speed makes him the fastest monster in the game, tied with PCX. However, 38 stamina means Nilo won't be sprinting for long, and unlike PCX, he has no real strong mobility options to make up for his low stamina. Nilo makes up for this in different ways, but that's for a little later. With this in mind, only 20 damage per hit is quite bad. However, Nilo is capable of dealing a lot more damage through the radiated debuff. This debuff is incredibly powerful and does a lot more, but what's currently relevant is the massive changes to his damage thresholds. While attacking a survivor who is radiated, Nilo does an extra 25 damage on everything he does. His basic attack now deals 45 damage, which means he can now 3-shot a normal survivor from full HP, and bone breaking on the second hit. This is a far cry from his pathetic 5-shot in normal circumstances. As such, the radiated debuff is essential to the success of Niloticus, and being unable to apply it makes him exceptionally weak. Thankfully, both of his abilities are capable of inflicting it. Nilo has a lot of passive abilities we need to talk about. First, let me go over Radiated now that we're here. The Radiated debuff deals slow tick damage over time, and adds a flat 25 damage bonus to all damage dealt by Niloticus. The Radiated debuff also highlights all survivors to Niloticus, giving him the best method of tracking. The damage over time dealt to survivors is also lethal, meaning if you know a survivor will die from it, you could just leave them to their doom. However, it might be worth it to secure the kill with your M1 and go through the animation. Whenever Niloticus kills a survivor through his basic attack, he turns the corpse into a radiation trap as well. This is especially powerful if you happen to kill a survivor in a narrow passageway or around a task, and can serve as an extra way of slowing down or zoning survivors. Nilo's last passive is his enhanced hearing. He's capable of hearing survivors farther away, as well as hearing their heartbeats. Keep your ears open as much as you can with Nilo, as you'll typically find that tracking survivors in general is one of his biggest weaknesses, and you'll want all the help you can get. Godly Leap is the first ability Nilo has, and it doesn't work how most would expect it to. All it does is have Niloticus jump forward a short distance and attempt to grab a survivor. If successful, Nilo will bite them and inflict Radiated for 5 seconds, while also dealing 25 damage. If the survivor is already radiated, it deals 50 damage. Much more notably, the ability doesn't actually move a survivor. If you grab them while you're directly on top of them, survivors will still go through the animation and be dragged along with you, but then teleport to the same spot you grabbed them after the animation is over. This is intentional with his design, as to avoid Nilo from glitching survivors out of the map. However, it also makes the ability much harder to utilize and overall weaker than most people would probably expect it to be. Nilo has to properly space this ability to get the most out of it, and even then there's no guarantee he can follow up with his regular attacks. The most consistent way I've found to land this ability efficiently is to get yourself on top of a survivor, let them run for a second, then use the ability to catch them as they try and get away from you. There's many other ways to use this ability, but as long as you keep your spacing in mind, you'll find the ability to have a lot of usages despite the weird teleporting quirk. The last thing I'll mention is during the leap, Nilo does regenerate stamina, and if he successfully grabs a survivor, their stamina regeneration is paused for the duration of it. Some Nilo players will recommend using Godly Leap for distance in some cases, but I personally would much rather save it for an attack. However, as we'll soon find, Nilo is a very dynamic monster with a lot of different playstyles and strategies. All of these traits together means Godly Leap takes a surprising amount of game knowledge and a little bit of practice to get the full value out of. To me, this actually makes the ability extremely fun to use. Getting the full value out of this ability requires all these different things, and maximizing it feels good because of it. It's not an ability you can just use mindlessly. Besides, if Nilo did always force survivors directly on top of him after Godly Leap, he'd be a little too good. Irradiated Mist has Nilo puke up a bunch of radiated fluid on the ground in a wide area. This ability adds a few extra seconds to the clock with each usage, and primarily serves as an area denial or zoning tool. The best time and place to use this is hard to quantify, as there are some moments where it can be worth it to drop a chase and instead set up a puddle, but that's just something you have to get a feel for on your own playstyle of Niloticus. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You need to use this ability to make Niloticus good. There's a lot of Nilos out there that neglect using this ability, and it hurts them a lot. However, a lot of them also don't use it nearly as well as they could be, which is also hurting them. The two easiest methods to get value out of Nilo's puddles is to put them through common areas survivors path through. This could just be intersections to deny a bunch of pathways at once, or common areas that survivors like to hang out at during the endgame, usually to camp at. Or you can puke on tasks. This is really effective too, as it'll prevent some survivors from doing their tasks sooner, buying you more time. Some survivors may also not care, which means they'll be softer for next time you catch them, or you can even secure a full-on kill thanks to their carelessness. Whenever possible, you want to do your best to zone survivors into the puddle. For example, they're camping in a corner with two passageways. Puke on one exit, then chase them from the other, forcing them into the puddle or forcing them to double back into you. Lastly, don't be afraid to use this ability aggressively to force survivors to reposition or possibly irradiate them if they're that unaware of you. You get time for using it, and placing it near survivors can still radiate them. It can absolutely be worth it to go out of your way to place puddles in a good area, even if it'll take some time to do it. You'll need to get a feel for it, as I mentioned before, but it is worth it. You want to use your puddles. Put this all together, and Niloticus is a little bit of everything. He's one of the most generalized monsters in the game, capable of slowly exhausting survivors through his stats alone, ambushing them with Godly Leap, zoning them with puddles, and more. You live and die by the radiated debuff, so you need to be looking for it to inflict it, and then capitalize on it as much as possible. I typically like to try and have at least 2 puddles down at once, and then from there I adapt to the map and build my strategy around that. Speaking of, Nilo feels pretty fine across the board when it comes to maps. Both pillars and pillar drainage can feel pretty bad sometimes, but other than that, there is generally always something Nilo feels like he can do to increase his odds, regardless of the map. Open maps like Forest and Mainland can warrant a more defensive and territorial approach for most of the match, focused on maintaining his puddles in strong areas and killing survivors that dare enter his territory. By the endgame, he can then start hunting more and finish off the last few survivors. Smaller maps such as Ward and Fazbear Frights can really empower his irradiated mist, allowing him to place them with a lot less scrutiny. He can afford to either play a lot more aggressively on these maps, or just focus on his puddles even more and make the map a lot more dangerous for survivors to traverse. Even on some of the hardest maps for monsters, such as Dungeon, Nilo's abilities, especially his puddles, give him a much better chance than some other monsters in this game. A good tip for any monster, but especially Niloticus, is that if you see a survivor already sprinting without you chasing them, they're a pretty good chase target, as they've likely already used a bit of stamina. This can especially help on open maps. Despite how good your speed stat is, your overall mobility isn't that great. You can out-stamina people, it just takes a while, and you shouldn't be really trying to do this until the endgame. And most of all, don't forget you have other means of tracking survivors. From your stamina draining to when survivors are nearby, to your ability to hear survivor heartbeats and hear them from farther away. Tracking is Nilo's weakest area, but making full use of his abilities will help a lot. Always try to put yourself in a survivor's shoes. Think about the map you're on and what survivors frequently do to protect themselves on these maps. On pillars, people like to walk around the edges of the map. On something like Schoolhouse, people like to sit in corners. Stuff like that. I went into this video thinking that Niloticus was actually going to be a fairly overrated monster. I was also going to heavily criticize the fact that he seemed like a directionless monster, as many of his abilities didn't really synergize with one another or his stats. I personally thought he just didn't have a clear design direction. I'm very happy to say that I feel as if I was wrong about pretty much all of these things. Nilo is currently a monster I think is very strong, and I personally find him extremely fun to play. I'm not sure if the survivors I play against really agree, but I'm having fun at least. The reason I find him so fun is he's a monster I feel like I have to use my brain on. The last few monsters I've made videos on I found very easy to find success with. They didn't really challenge me in any sort of way. Nilo has a lot of different quirks, like with Godly Leap, that just makes using it feel rewarding. And of course, zoning survivors with any monster is generally satisfying. Nilo feels like the closest we'll get to a jack-of-all-trades monster without him being too weak or too strong because of it. He's capable of employing several different types of strategies, and part of your job as Niloticus is to recognize which strategy is best suited for the map and types of survivors you're up against. I think this is why a lot of people don't play Nilo, as well as why the Nilos I do see typically struggle to get a lot of kills during a match. He's not the most straightforward monster in the game, and he has a surprising learning curve to his abilities. While his stats are good for it, you shouldn't be aggressively chasing all the time and trying to out-stamina every survivor you come across. He has many different methods of tracking, but all of them are on the weaker side and require to use sight, hearing, and even strategy to locate survivors. I encourage you to give him a try, and don't get discouraged if you aren't getting good results immediately. If you take the time to learn him, you'll have a super fun monster on your hands. The lessons you learn in the process of getting good at Nilo are all things you can use to help you learn monsters in the future as well. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Keep an eye out for my community posts, as I love to do frequent polls about future video topics. Thanks, and have a good one. I'll leave you with some gameplay.